Uh, I'm an architect. I grew up in Fairfield County. I grew up in New Canaan. Um, my father was a planner. My mother was a furniture designer. I went to the public schools in New Canaan. And then I went to school at Amherst College and studied American Studies uh, and Humanities and Fine Arts. And then after working in Boston for a year or so, I went to Yale and studied architecture and business. So I have a master's from in both architecture and an MBA from Yale. And I purposely educated myself so that I could have a broader role in making buildings. I was always interested in architecture and buildings, but I wanted, because my father was a planner and often was involved in doing the programming for building assignments, I got interested in being involved in charting the purpose of buildings, not just what they look like, but other aspects of the purposes of buildings and how they're perceived and created. And so that led me to a career of making buildings, both as architect, but also as developer. And in the course of doing that, I've tried to broaden my understanding of how buildings work and impact the environment and energy. And that in turn brought me to focus on the importance of electric vehicles. Because those of us who are architects and are committed to building green buildings realize that, at least in the Northeast, it's actually the transportation sector that has the biggest impact on the environment, both in terms of particulate pollution and also in terms of global warming. So it's hard to have a career committed to the creation of green buildings without giving equal emphasis to helping our country and our community migrate to electric transportation. So in my own personal work as an architect and developer, and every one of us who owns a house or owns a building, we have to take responsibility for how we heat it and cool it and power it. And most of us, at least until recently, the default way to heat your house in the winter was to use natural gas or oil. If we talk to the local HVAC contractors, that's what they'll sell us because that's what they know how to sell. But unfortunately, when you burn gas and you burn oil, you're contributing to the problem. I've had the good fortune to make some very large buildings. In fact, I designed and built the largest apartment building in Connecticut in New Haven. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute, 360 State Street. And so I had this heavy burden of figuring out, this building is going to be around for a long time. How do I want to have it impact the environment? And I ended up learning about fuel cells and created the first apartment building to be powered and heated with a fuel cell. Primarily because if you look at this chart, the particulate pollution from creation of electricity with a fuel cell is less than 1% of the pollution that comes from powering buildings from the grid or even from microturbines. And it's really the NOx and SOx that impacts the health of people in cities where asthma rates and health impacts are the greatest. So this is the building that I designed and developed back in 2010. It's called 360 State Street. You can see it in the foreground of the downtown of New Haven. And it has 500 apartments. It has parking above a grocery store. And it is a LEED Platinum building. We designed it to not only not use fossil fuels for heating and electricity, but we also designed it to use about 50% less energy than a conventional code compliant building. So
Bruce, I had a question.
Yes.
On the last slide, you named some things and I'm kind of ignorant. I don't know what a microturbine is, what a fuel cell is.
Oh, good point. If you have a microturbine, which is a fairly clean, efficient way to use natural gas to make power, that's
what is a microturbine?
Yeah, a microturbine would be the type of equipment that a natural gas power plant would use, and that's been until recently the if they're opening a new power plant in Connecticut, they typically would use a natural gas microturbine at a smaller scale. But even those now are being challenged by environmentalists as being too dirty, because it's now shown that if you look at the long term, it's actually cheaper to make electric power from solar and wind turbines. These are different technologies with greater efficiency of making electricity than the grid. The fuel cell still uses natural gas, but instead of burning the natural gas, it uses a catalytic process. It's sort of similar to what happens with batteries to make electricity. And I wasn't planning to talk about the chemistry of fuel cells, other than to say that you don't have to burn the fuel to use them. And if you want to power a tall building like the one I built in New Haven, there's not the roof area to power it entirely with solar panels. So you sort of have to look to other solutions. For those of you who haven't seen a fuel cell before, this is a picture of me in front of a fuel cell at 360 State. This one produces 400 kilowatts of continuous power. It is about the size of a tractor trailer container, and it weighs 60,000 pounds, but it'll fit in, it fits on the ground floor of the building. And again, it it reduces the particulate pollution by 99.8%, and it allows us to avoid having to burn any fossil fuels for heating the building or powering it. Another project that I've done using the same technology, I don't know how familiar those in the meeting are with downtown Hartford, but this is a picture of 777 Main Street, which is a 26-story building that was originally built for the Hartford National Bank. Then it was occupied by Bank of America. And around 2012, it became vacant as the banks left and the tenants left the building. If you can recycle an empty building, that's a much more environmentally friendly way to build than to build a new building, because of all the embodied energy in that building. But we were able to acquire the building, for about $18 a square foot, and we renovated it, and now it's the largest apartment building in downtown Hartford. And it has 285 apartments, as well as a ground floor retail, including a CVS where the banking hall was. And it has a small grocery store, has a couple of restaurants. As part of our redevelopment, we placed a fuel cell in the back of the building, and that fuel cell is augmented with a rooftop solar array with 115 kilowatt capacity solar array on the roof. It powers the building. It also powers, we have about 28 electric car charging stations. So it's a way you can fuel your car without creating any carbon pollution. We also installed 6 Tesla superchargers, so that this has the added advantage of helping bring more business to downtown Hartford for people passing through the area. I've always been an advocate of putting high-speed car chargers where there's retail to provide additional business for those retailers. I'm going to talk a little later in the presentation about the charging infrastructure for electric cars. But if you have a high-speed charger, you don't need to plug in for too long. In about half an hour, you can get a full charge. And so it's just time enough to be able to go get a cup of coffee or do a little shopping at a drugstore, or maybe pick up some takeout. And so as a result of having these 6 high-speed car chargers, our local merchants get the benefit of that additional revenue around the clock. Another example I want to give of sort of decarbonizing buildings is my own home. And this is a picture of our house after we fixed it up and turned it into a zero energy building. It's a part of the building was built in 1916, and then it was added onto by some other owners. And yet it was a very inefficient building from an energy perspective with an oil furnace. And, we would have $2,000 oil bills in the winter, and it, it contributed to the carbon problem that we're facing. So I took it as a personal and professional challenge to try to remake the house in a way that it wasn't contributing to this problem that humanity's facing. So the first thing I did, you can sort of see the older roof here. The picture that I had just showed you was the after picture. But because it was such an old house and it wasn't really built to very high standards or even to code in some areas, we took the roof sheathing off and took this, there was no insulation in some of the roof, but we ended up re-insulating the roof membrane with a closed cell foam. And then we put the new roof on. You'll see on the left side, we put a very highly reflective roof, asphalt shingle, which is called Solaris, that reflects a lot of the light so that your air conditioning doesn't have to work as hard because it just reflects the heat. And then on the flat portion of the roof, we use an EPDM roof and then put solar panels on that, you'll see later on. And then we replaced the oil furnace with what's known as a VRF, variable refrigerant flow air-to-air heat pump system that for both heating and cooling. These are these Mitsubishi units that sit on the outside, and then there's an inside unit which goes in the place of the old oil furnace, but serves the same ductwork as we had before. And it's an all-electric system. And then you can see the solar panels on the roof, both the original panels we had on the garage in the foreground, and then the additional panels that we added after the renovation. And this created enough electricity over the course of the year to meet all of our lighting demands and our heating and air conditioning demands for the house. And so we're in balance and not having to contribute to this carbon crisis that we have. And interestingly, we actually produce more power when the grid needs it the most on summer days when the grid is overloaded. Another thing I was actually able to use today were my Tesla Powerwalls. And these are batteries that instead of having a generator when you have a power outage, the batteries just kick in and power the house. And we actually had about 20 minutes today because of the high winds that the power was out. And so these Powerwalls allowed us to have continuous power. They were actually charged a little bit, even though it was raining out, by the by the sun. It was still out, and we only used about 3% of the capacity today. But the Tesla Powerwalls are designed so that even on a winter day when there's not much sun, we can keep the house operating.
Right, so we have a couple of private questions and also one from Anita.
I live in a condo. Most of the condos here in Wilton, they're all electric. It's all electric heat, electric, which is the most expensive energy source.
Well, it's interesting. It's actually not the most expensive if you have a VRF heat pump. If you
install those into some of these older condos. If you have a home, it's a little different.
Yeah. Well, if you have a condo, if you have an exterior wall, you can use a cassette type system. Now, architecturally, you'd have to find a place to put the outdoor unit. If you have a deck or something, you could put it there, and then you bring the refrigerant line in. But actually, people don't realize it, but electric heat is actually the cheapest type of heat as long as you're using the variable refrigerant flow heat pump technology. If you're using just a resistant electric, that is expensive. But all of our heat and cooling should be done electric. And if you have, eventually, if you have a oil furnace, you're going to replace it. It's just in the same way that if you have inefficient electric heat in your condo, it would make sense to upgrade it to a more efficient system. It might pay for itself in 3 or 4 years, but you could also reduce your heating costs by making sure that your house is well insulated and sealed.